Okay, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome and welcome back to Cafe Ole. My name is Jay. Here at Cafe Ole with Nefesh B'Nefesh, we go over the everyday Hebrew you need here in Israel to succeed. Whether that's reading and paying your bills, going grocery shopping and reading nutritional labels, keeping up with the news, striking up a conversation, flirting, dating, job interviewing, complaining, all the everyday things you do in your native language, in your country of origin, but here in Israel in modern Hebrew. As always, we want to hear from you what topics you'd like us to cover. You can always be in touch with us by email at hebrew@nbn.org.il. You can also see all of our previous lessons up on YouTube. Just go to youtube.com, type in Cafe Ole. The very first entry will be a link to our playlist with over 150 past lessons, 25, probably closer to even 26,000 views at this point. You can not only follow us there, and click the subscribe button to get all of our latest classes. You can also leave us a comment there. And if you're joining us live on Zoom, you can write to us in the chat with any questions, comments, concerns, and topic requests you may like. The Q&A we reserve for those of us who are joining live only for questions pertaining to the class we're about to start. And also one last piece of housekeeping. This is our last session of our last class of our winter session. We're going to take a 1-week break next week, and then we'll be back with our spring session, full of classes that are not only related to the holidays that are coming up in the spring and everything that goes with them, because there's some quite important holidays that come up, both religious and civil holidays, but also topics per your request, topics we've either not covered in a long time or topics that are brand new that we haven't even done once. So we're really excited for our spring session, but there still are slots that we have yet to fill with topics. So if you have a topic that we haven't done in a while or that we've never done, or you just want to know if we've done it before, after, of course, you've checked on our YouTube list, it's very simple to type, just Cafe Ole News or Cafe Ole Translation, something along those lines. Definitely be in touch with us. With that, we're going to do something a little different tonight. We haven't actually done this topic before. We talk a lot about food here. And we're going to continue to talk a lot about food because food is important to Israeli society, Israeli culture, Israeli identity, all the different peoples who live in Israel. Food is an integral part of how we define ourselves. But we haven't taken a step back necessarily and said, okay, well, in the last 10, 15 years, on the one hand, it's great that Israeli food has made its way around the world. And foods that weren't necessarily known about, even among in Jewish communities, are now well known around the world. But there are still some that may be a mystery, either because you don't have an Israeli restaurant near you, or for various reasons you don't know about them. So tonight is all about foods that may be new to you and how they're used in Israel. And we're going to look at a quintessential Israeli food, I would say Israel's national food. And we're going to get into a little bit of the politics behind that as well. But first, to illustrate why this is so important and why discovering foods and even discovering foods within Israeli society is such a big deal, we're going to look at a classic commercial from about, I think it's also around 10, 15 years ago. It actually might be newer than that. This is a classic, and this explains not only the importance of food, but a integral part of Israeli humor. So let me pull it up and make sure that's sound and optimized. I'm going to have to translate. We're going to watch it once and then translate it together because you'll see it's going back between two languages that isn't quite one or the other, as you'll see in a second. Oop, wrong one to share. Let's try that again, folks. Yes, we're sharing you. There we go. All right, let's get this nice and big. We're going to watch it together once. There are Hebrew subtitles because remember, this is for Israeli consumption. This was on primetime TV, and then I'm going to translate it together.
Tate, Mama, ich hab a Kunst. Begelach daken. Mit Tamen.
Was? Begelach mit Tamen?
Ja. Mit Pepper, mit Cheddar, mit Avlones.
Pepper, das ist für Marokkaners.
Tamen mit Euchel. Ich will ein Beulen.
Ingele, wenn der kleine Ben Gurion nicht sein Rosh mit dem Schule in Eretz Israel, den will ich machen, Beigalach mit Tamen. גוילם.
עם ישראל, הגיע הזמן לבייגלה דקים דקים בטעמים. חדש מבייגל בייגל, דקים דקים, בייגלה במגוון טעמים.
Okay, so let's watch this from the start. It says at the bottom, מאפיית בייגל בייגל, פולין 1880. The Bagel Bakery in Poland, 1880. Bagel in Israel, in Israeli culture, there's bagel and then there's bagel. When it's referring to this kind of bagel, it's referring to a pretzel, not a bagel that we know from American Jewish culture. American Jewish bagels in that respect are much harder to find, even to this day in Israel. They're referring to pretzels. Okay.
Tate, Mama.
Abba, Ima, I'm going to do the Hebrew part, not the Yiddish part. And for those of you who speak Yiddish, you can quickly figure out this is not actually Yiddish. It's a Hebraicized Yiddish because this is for an Israeli audience. And that's where the punchline of this commercial comes in. So, Abba, Ima, Dad, Mom.
Ich hab a Kunst.
Yesh li rayon. I have an idea.
Beigelach daken daken.
Begele dakin dakin. It's a play on the Hebrew, making it sound like Yiddish. A super thin pretzel. Dak is thin.
Mitamen.
Mitamen, bita'amim. Right? It's trying to say mit tamen, which is of course not Yiddish, but it's trying to say with flavor. Bita'amim, with flavors. What? Ma?
Beigalach mit Tamen.
Begala bita'amim, pretzels with flavor or flavored pretzels.
Amen.
Ja.
Ken.
Mit Pepper. Mit
Im pilpel with pepper.
Cheddar.
Im cheddar with cheddar cheese.
Mit Avlone.
Im tavlinim with spices.
Pepper, das ist für Marokkaners.
Pilpel ze lemarokkaim. Pepper, that's for Moroccans. We'll get to why that's.
Tamen mit Euchel.
Tamen mi oichel, ta'am be'ochel. Flavor, spice in food.
Ich will ein Beulen.
Anachnu Polanim, we're Polish.
Ingele,
Chamud, sweetheart, sweetie. Beyom shebo Ben Gurion hakatan, on the day that little Ben Gurion
der kleine Ben Gurion nicht sein Rosh mit dem Schule
will be Yeh Rosh Memshala Be'eretz Israel, will be the prime minister in the land of Israel.
in Eretz Israel, den will ich machen.
Az nase begele betamim. Then we'll make flavored pretzels.
Beigalach mit Tamen. גוילם.
A golem. What a moron.
עם ישראל,
Am Yisrael, trying to make an Ashkenazi accent of saying Am Yisrael, people of Israel.
הגיע הזמן לבייגלה דקים דקים בטעמים.
Higia Zman, the time has come for begele, pretzels, dakim, super thin with flavor.
חדש מבייגל בייגל, דקים דקים, בייגלה במגוון טעמים.
Right? The joke, of course, if you're well known in Israeli society, is that Ashkenazim stereotypically don't put any flavor in their food or doesn't have any flavor in their food. And so when he says pepper, that's for the Moroccans, because Moroccans constitute one of the biggest immigrant group in Israeli Jewish society. So all of that stuff is forbidden for us. And actually the sequel to this commercial, no less funny and quick.
Tate, Mama. Ich hab a neuer Kunst.
Right? Yesh li od rayon. I have another idea. And then they go, what? And then
Verkackte Kunstmacher.
עוד פעם זה והרעיונות שלו. Not quite what she just said in Yiddish, but not another round with his ideas.
עם ישראל, הגיע הזמן שגם אתם תטעמו בייגלה דקים דקים בטעם חמוץ מתוק של
Higia Zman, the time has come for you to try pretzels with flavor, and this time chamutz matok. sour and sweet and sour, as we would say in English, right? The idea of showing this to you is not just because it's funny and it's a very popular and well-known commercial in Israeli society. It's to point out that even among Israelis, there are things that aren't necessarily known to one another. There are foods that are brand new for some people that others grew up in, and vice versa. And a lot of that comes from diaspora communities. A lot of that comes from our region, being part of the Mediterranean and the Middle East. And some of these are Israeli inventions, and that's where it's going to lead to our second part. So let's get into some of the things. Now, again, I'm going to preface this. Please spare yourself typing to me to say, well, I already knew about that. And Jay, that's not new to me. That's good for you. Okay, there's 285 people on this call. I'm sure some of the things on this list are not going to be new to you. Some of these things may be brand new to you. Some of these things, I didn't include everything. Why didn't you include that or that? I can't suit everyone. This is based on speaking with Anglo Olim, other Olim, my own experience, things that I know, being somewhat well versed in food trends, both here in Israel and around the world, that I'm pretty sure a good substantial number of you have never encountered until you've been in Israel. That's the point of this class. And that commercial is really much to say, even within Israel, there are things that aren't so common from one to another, like making fun of one community's type of food to another, which is very much some of the kind of humor we have here. Anyways, let's get to some of our vocabulary before we get to following an important recipe. So as opposed to our other lessons, right, this is going to be a little different in that the Hebrew is still there, the transliteration is still there, but we have some other categories here. Right, we have the English, what we call it in English, if it has its own word, its origin. Some of these things are going to be whole ingredients, raw ingredients, chomrei gelem, we talked about the other week. Some of this is going to be made with things, and that's going to be listed, and also what it's used for. Again, by no means comprehensive, just trying to make us dent in things that I'm pretty sure until you've been to Israel, you may not have known about. So first is a condiment. We're going to start with a couple of condiments. The first one is amba. Amba is, as its origin says here, it's both Iraq and India. For centuries, there was a trade link directly from Iraq and India back and forth through the Persian Gulf. That Jews played a significant role in spice trade between the two areas. Both had populations living in both lands for thousands of years and traded with one another as well as with non-Jewish merchants. Amba is very much a product of that trade route. Amba is usually made out of unripe mangoes that's mixed in a very spiced, not always spicy sauce. And a lot of the flavors that you taste in that come from both the Iraqi kitchen as well as the Indian kitchens, because there are multiple ones, obviously. So a lot of flavors like fenugreek, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, and asafoetida, and some peppers sometimes, and certainly the mangoes coming from India into the Middle East. It's a very popular condiment among Iraqi Jews. It's going to show up again in a very important dish that we're going to talk about shortly, but this is a classic one. You know this because it's bright orange, if not fluorescent orange in color. It's spiced. Sometimes it's quite spicy. One of the things you often ask when you get this on street food, particularly like falafel and shawarma, and another one called sabich, we're going to talk about in a second. Some people don't want it. They not only can't stand the taste, they think it seeps into their skin and clothes and they smell like it for a long time. That has a lot to do with the one spice fenugreek we're going to talk about in a little bit. Some of that's a street urban myth, some of that's for real, but that's definitely one you may not have encountered until you're here in Israel. The other one is srug, another hot sauce. This one is coming from Yemen and not from more places east. Srug is a composite of hot peppers, coriander, seeds, all sorts of other spices and herbs. Usually it's green, sometimes it's red, and it varies in heat, but it's also a condiment. Okay. Limon parsi. In Hebrew, in Israel, we call this limon parsi. Depending on where you are in the rest of the Middle East, you may call it something else. In English, it's usually called dried lime. This is a whole lime. Think of like good old limes, green limes, that are dried out completely. If they're white, it means that they've been sent out, they've been out in the sun until completely dried. They also come black, which means that they've usually been treated, I think, with lye or some other chemical, and they're completely dried out. These are used very classically in Iranian cooking, in in stews and things that are give this flavor is very almost stereotypical. It almost tastes like candy, how intensely lemon this flavor is, because it's a dehydrated lime. And it's used a lot in stews and other things like that. I've also seen it used in all sorts of other dishes, not necessarily Iranian, but elsewhere in the Middle East. A very classic flavor that you'll find a lot. Usually it's a whole lime, white or black. Mez Zohal, many of you have probably heard of, if not tasted, if not have a strong thought in favor or very much against Mevradim. Mevradim is rosewater, and that's a more well-known scent and flavor, especially in the West, because it also finds its way in soaps and perfumes. That classic rose flavor that is a byproduct of taking essentially the essential oils out of rose, and you're left with this water that is heavily scented with rose that's used in a lot of different ways in the West. And it's a product that was created in the Middle East for millennia. Mez Zohar is another one. It's probably one you may know that's English version, but not the Hebrew. Mez Zohar is orange blossom water, or any kind of citrus blossoms that have undergone the same process as rose petals. It's distilled to get out the essential oils, and you're left with water that is heavily scented with orange blossoms. This is used a lot in desserts and sweets and beverages coming in North Africa in particular. It's a very, if you've ever smelled citrus blossoms, which usually start in another few months here in Israel, you'll recognize the smell and the taste very immediately. It's very much that smell of citrus blossoms. A great flavor. If you do not like rosewater, this is a great one as well to find. It's often used, like I said, in desserts and beverages. Hawaiij. Hawaiij is a spice blend that also comes from Yemen. Hawaiij comes in two forms. There's the Hawaiij for soup, and there's the Hawaiij for coffee. The coffee one is usually a whiter, lighter color, but they're both a combination of various ground spices together. For soups, it goes without saying, it's what's used to flavor a lot of Yemenite soups, soups that come from Yemenite Jewish communities. And the Hawaiian for coffee is exactly that. You stir it in either if you're making black coffee, meaning ground coffee that you pour boiling water over rather than percolated coffee. You could also, by the way, stir it into espresso grounds or things like that and brew it like that. But traditionally, you're making whether you want to call it Turkish or Arab or black coffee, as we call it here in Israel, coffee that you put the grounds in the water and immediately boil over a flame. You'll often add a pinch of the Hawaiian for coffee to give it extra flavor. Two more spice blends that you may have heard of. I know these are certainly available around the world. Again, not all these things are necessarily Israeli, but for many of us, because we don't travel in the Middle East and we don't travel elsewhere in the Mediterranean, these are our first encounters of something that we otherwise take for granted in this neck of the woods. This is a great example. Ras el Hanout and Baharat. These are two spice blends that are found throughout the region. The only difference is essentially where they're from and a little bit of their composition. Ras el Hanout is coming from excuse me, Ras el Hanout, you can figure out almost, even though it's Arabic, you can almost figure it out from the Hebrew if you turned it into Hebrew. Ras, Rosh, Hanout, Hanout. So Ras, Rosh, head, and Hanout, 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 store, right? So the head of the store, literally the head of the store. The idea was that a spice owner, a spice store owner would gather up either whatever's left over or the opposite, the finest of his spices, and put them together in one spice blend and call it ras el hanut. Whether it's the dregs or whether it's the top, it's a very popular seasoning, specifically from North America, from North Africa. What's it made out of? It depends on what brand you're talking about. Here in Israel, it's packaged usually in big containers, and you can do everything with it, especially as I said, from savory dishes. So that could go on meats, that could go in stews, that could go in casseroles, anything where you need a composite of flavors of spices. And you can think of all the classic North African spices that would go in this. So there was certainly cumin and coriander and cinnamon and allspice and nutmeg and sometimes even rose petals and mint and all sorts of other things in it. Hey, the thing about these spice blends is that they vary from one brand to another, from one store to another. Literally, that's the idea of Ras El Hanut, the head of the shop, the head of the store, meaning that it's whatever that store deems to be its mix. The other version is, if that was the North African version, the Levantine version, this part of the Middle East, is called Bahrat. Bahrat comes from the Arabic meaning jewels or jewel, and it's exactly the same idea. You're putting together a composite of spices. This one's a little bit darker. The one I like a lot, which is called Maimon, is a brand of spices that they sell in Israel. This one is more allspice, it's more cloves, it's more cinnamon, it's darker, it's more much warmer. Ras al Hanout is also a lot of warm spices, but Baharat is also a lot of warmth. The same principle. You're using it on a variety of things, whether it's stewed or roasted meats, or in, let's say you're making lentils or some sort of legumes, you can add that in. If you're making some sort of sauce, either with tahina or yogurt, you can put that in there as well. It's a great multi-spice blend that you can just buy in one container. This one I know many of you know from abroad, but you don't know necessarily either its origin or the fact that now that you're in Israel, you can get it fresh, and there is indeed such a thing. Zatar. Zatar is, you'll see it often translated as wild hyssop or wild thyme or some combination of those words, or just hyssop. Za'atar is an actual herb. It grows, it's a green herb. It is domesticated in Israel. You can buy fresh za'atar. There is such a thing as wild za'atar, which of course has some protection over it by the National Parks Authority. But za'atar fresh you can buy in a lot of nicer grocery stores, nicer greengrocers, not necessarily your local supermarket, but sometimes a smaller, more gourmet one will have fresh za'atar. The taste is very similar to fresh oregano. It's very sharp. It's very pungent. It really takes over a lot of flavor. Which is why it's also dried and combined usually with other spices, not just salt, but also sometimes sesame seeds, sometimes sumac. That's the za'atar you're probably familiar with, dried powdered za'atar. But in Israel, it also comes fresh. A different taste for sure. And then finally, in this category, chilbe. Chilbe is what we would call in English fenugreek. This is a very popular flavor in both Indian and Yemenite dishes here in Israel. As well as other cuisines use it. It either comes dried, either as a whole seed or ground up in a light brown color that smells a lot like maple syrup, or it comes fresh. One of the popular ways to prepare this among Yemenite Jews is to mix it with water and basically whip it so it becomes this frothy dip that you dip various breads in. Let's move on to filled things and prepared foods. Sabich. Sabich is a very close runner-up for a quintessential Israeli dish. This originates, we're told, originates among Iraqi Jews because it was traditionally eaten on Shabbat morning. Why? Because it's comprised of things that don't need to be cooked. Pita, filled with pre-cooked and roasted eggplant, hard-boiled eggs, salad, sometimes trina, certainly amba, that condiment we talked about, that's an Iraqi Indian creation, and sometimes all sorts of other things. Some people include roasted potatoes in it. Some people include all sorts of other things. Sabich has become a really popular street food in Israel because it's made with very cheap ingredients. It's easily made. It's quite healthy considering what's in it. It's a really nice filling food also because it's also very nutritious between the eggplant and the eggs and the salad. It's very easy to make. Sabich. I know that's again one of those things that's become popular, but it's only because Israel in pushing it abroad through cultural diplomacy, and Israelis going abroad, and Jews coming and visiting Israel and then taking it back, has it become popular. A similar idea, this one is found throughout the Levant, we're going to call it, is arayes. Arayes is ground meat, usually with some spices and onions and other things, that's stuffed into a pita. The pita is usually cut in half, if not quarters, and is then grilled on its sides so that the meat cooks inside the pita and it all cooks as one thing, which makes obviously the pita harder, crispy, and it makes the immediate inside of the pizza very soft from all the fat and the juices from the meat. It's a really popular sandwich because it's in small bites and it's self-contained, right? You pick it up by the pizza and it's cooked inside. It's a very popular thing to eat for sure here. Another one, this one I grew up knowing this as kibbeh because I was introduced this not through Jews but through Lebanese restaurants. In many places in the Middle East, it's known as kibbeh. In Israel, we almost entirely call it kubeh. It's the same idea. It's a whole family of stuffed foods that essentially is bulgur wheat, that's stuffed with ground meat, spiced usually with pine nuts or almonds inside, and there's a variety of ways to cook it. Here in Israel, the two most popular ways to cook it are either fried, you fry it as a whole ball, deep fried, or most commonly, you'll find it in soups, in which case the bulgurs might be used semolina said, and it's in a whole variety of soups. And it's a really popular dish. There are various different kinds. There's kube selek. Selek is beets, so it's a beet-based soup with these dumplings basically inside of it. There's also kube chamusta, my personal favorite. Chamusta is coming from the word chamutz, or vice versa. Chamutz in Hebrew is sour. So it's a bright yellow, sour flavored soup with these big bulgur or semolina filled ground meat dumplings inside of it. Really popular in Israel. And then finally, in our encapsulated food, we can't escape bulekas. Bulekas are part of, you could follow this chain around the world of flaky pastry filled with various things, right? In Israel, we call them bulekas. They're coming from the Turkish strain called burek. Burek. There's no two dots on the O. I apologize for that. And just like in Turkey, here in Israel, they come with a variety of fillings, usually either vegetable or dairy. There you can find meat bulekas, but usually they're dairy or parve, meaning neither meat or dairy. And in Israel, in fact, you can tell what's inside a bulekas based on its shape. There's very strict regulation as to the shape of a bulekas and what's in it. By the way, bulekas is one piece of pastry. Bulekasim is plural. Okay. Many words that are of non-Hebrew origin will have a s sound at the end, usually a samech, to indicate that you usually eat these in a lot, right? You eat a lot of bulekas at once. You don't eat one. That would just be wrong. But typically it's flaky phyllo dough filled with a variety of things. It could be cheese, it could be potato, it could be spinach, it could be all sorts of different types of cheeses. That's obviously a classic. Again, everyone around the world has a tradition of filling a bread product with fillings. This is the most popular one that you can find everywhere in Israel. Another prepared food you've probably never seen before, except in Israel, and even it shows in its name. Kigel Yerushalmi, or in English, Jerusalem kugel. This is a product of the turn of the 19th century, early 20th century, combining the tradition of kugel from Eastern Europe with the Middle East. And so you get this creation that's typically only served on Shabbat, but you can also find it throughout the week, which are noodles, like pasta noodles, think like spaghetti, that are cooked and then are mixed in with sugar and black pepper and then baked in trays. So it looks like a kugel, looks like kigel, right? It's got the shreds, it could be potato, it could be anything else, but the flavor is very different because the only flavor you're tasting essentially, besides the sugar to elevate it, is the black pepper. It's a very unique dish. If you've never tried it before, next time you don't have to just be in Jerusalem to get this, by the way. You can find this in other places, especially getting towards Shabbat. Highly recommend at least trying it once. Then we have a whole family of breaded goods that are specifically from the Yemenite Jewish community. Again, a lot of these foods that you're only finding here are from communities that didn't whose diaspora upon the foundation of the state of Israel came almost exclusively to Israel, right? Whereas in North America, for example, the vast majority of Jews right now are of Ashkenazi background, Central and Eastern European background, even though the original Jewish immigrants to North America were Sephardic. The same thing here. The vast majority of Yemenite Jews, before and after the state of Israel was founded, came to Israel, did not go elsewhere for various reasons. Usually it's because of access, right? And so a lot of foods you won't necessarily find unless there are people who know how to cook them or grew up eating them or took them with them. Case in point, Jachnun, Melawach, Kubane. There's actually more. There's Lachuch I didn't put in here, but these are the three that are the most well-known in Israeli society. Jachnun, Melawach, Kubana. They're all essentially the same base, which is a dough that has been kneaded a lot. That's traditionally made with clarified butter. Those of you know Indian cuisine, that's ghee. It's often made nowadays with margarine. If you're lucky, it's made with actual clarified butter or even vegetable oil instead of margarine. But there's the parve version, the non-dairy version, and the dairy version. You always want the dairy. The difference is preparation. Jachnun is folded over again and again, so it's super thin, and then it's rolled into a cylinder that's then often covered in baking paper and wrapped together in a tin overnight. Jachnun is traditionally eaten on Shabbat. And you'll see places advertise that they have jachnun for sale on Fridays and Saturdays with this tradition. It's baked overnight, so it becomes super soft, super sweet, and it's very brown, and it comes apart. You usually eat it with tomato, like grated tomato and a hard-boiled egg and some slug. This is a classic one. Melawach is its cousin. It's the same principle, but instead of being baked overnight, it's flattened into a pancake and then fried in a pan. Same idea. It's crispy as opposed to soft like jachnun. It's very crispy and crunchy. A lot of people use it as a wrap if you really want to overdo it. Kubane is a very similar type of red dough, but this time it's baked, and it's baked in a circular tin. Usually like big globs of dough are pushed together in the same tin, also baked slowly overnight. It's fluffy as opposed to the other ones, right? Jachnun is really soft and pulls apart. Melawach is crispy and falls apart. This pulls apart, but is very fluffy in texture. Again, there are some places that only make this for Shabbat. There's some places that make this all week round because they're so popular. Let's keep going. We got a lot to cover with little time left. Masabacha and mashawsha. You know hummus. And if you've never eaten hummus in Israel or elsewhere in the Middle East, you really haven't eaten hummus. First off, it is not hummus. It has never been hummus. Even if you want to pronounce it like other cultures here in the Middle East, like in the Arabic hummus, it has never been hummus. Okay, so let's just get that out of our vocabulary altogether. And there are different types, particularly the types of things you put on it. But one of the other kinds, sort of hummus adjacent dish, is called masabacha in some parts of Israel, and typically in the north of Israel, it's called mashawsha. which is essentially instead of pureeing the chickpeas after they're cooked all the way to a fine, to a smooth paste, you leave them somewhat whole, or at least partially whole. And then you mix that with tahina and the various spices that go into hummus, and you serve that. First off, hummus should always be served hot. Hot or warm, not cold right out of the grocery fridge. When you go to a hummusiya, a hummus restaurant, it's always served warm because that's adds to the flavor, and that's just the way it should be eaten anyways. And one of the dishes they'll have at a good humusia is masabacha or mashausha, whatever they call it, which is these stewed chickpeas that are partially mashed and mixed with tahina. So it's not smooth like hummus. It has the same taste though. Exact same ingredients, exact same flavor, just a different preparation. So it's a different mouthfeel, a different texture. Let's keep going. Mufleta, we've talked about before. We're going to talk about again when we get closer to Pesach. Mufleta is a classic dessert from the North African Jewish communities. That's simply a crepe. It is flour, water, some sort of fat, usually oil, sometimes clarified butter, put together and fried on a pan. Traditionally, it's served at Mimuna, the holiday that immediately follows Pesach. We'll talk about that one again, usually covered in like honey and sometimes butter and sometimes jam and eaten rolled up. The other one that's become really popular, at least here in Tel Aviv and elsewhere in major cities, is a classic Middle Eastern dessert called knafe. Knafe is shredded dough. Think like phyllo dough, but very fine. Looks like very thin noodles. That's baked in various layers with syrup, with a specific type of cheese, usually pistachios or something else topped on it. It is delicious. You should absolutely have knafe. Plenty of places make it throughout Israel, kosher as well as not kosher. The only difference is, does it have a kashrut certification of kashrut? But it is a wonderful dairy dessert. Some fruits and vegetables you may not be familiar with outside of being in Israel. Kohlrabi. Kohlrabi is not an Israeli vegetable. Sorry to burst your bubbles, folks. It is grown throughout the Mediterranean and Europe. Its name is German in origin. It's treated a lot like a turnip. So it's either freshly eaten, you'll see it a lot in salads, and it's this time of year. You see kohlrabi in the markets. It's usually eaten fresh, either in slices or all sorts of different ways. It can also be cooked, just like you would cook, excuse me, essentially a turnip. Mangold. Mangold you see now year round. Mangold, don't be alarmed by this word. You'll see it all the time in home recipes and restaurants and things like that. Mangold is simply chard or Swiss chard. A leafy green that can be eaten raw. It can be cooked. A very popular local version of when you think of spinach and kale, mangold is the other one that you see quite often, even more frequently. Shesek is not from Israel, although you've probably eaten it here only. Shesek is in English known as loquat. It is from the Far East, China in particular. It's just that it's grown in abundance in Israel. It usually comes into the markets just before Pesach. I've already seen some. It's a orange-colored fruit that has these big pits inside. It's a really nice pungent flavor. You can eat fresh or jams. And zuta. Zuta is an herb that grows exclusively in the land of Israel. A lot of dried teas will have that in it, but you can also get fresh zuta. Zuta is a really sharp, minty flavor. Think like wintergreen. It's even more intense than regular mint flavor. And it's known to be medicinal and is used always medicinal. It's only grown. It's originally from the land of Israel. It's only grown in the land of Israel. You can find a lot of dried teas with this as well. A great one to find. And finally, before we jump to what I think is the quintessential Israeli food, we're going to talk about some Israeli creations. These are not the top of the list, folks. The other things that we talked about have other origins. They may have become popularized in Israel, but they aren't necessarily Israeli origins. The next four are, these are not Hall of Fame foods. Popular foods, but not Hall of Fame foods, and you'll understand why shortly. First off is hashachal, or as its proper name is hashachar haoleh. Hashachar or hashachar haoleh is chocolate spread. Many of you, when you've been to Israel, your introduction to chocolate spread may not have been Nutella. It was hashachar haoleh. First off, hashachar haoleh does not have hazelnuts like Nutella does. It comes in various different kinds. What is it based on? Is it non-dairy? Is it dairy? The point is, hashachar haoleh is very Israeli. It is chocolate spread you put on toast as well as you put in baked goods. You can just eat it out of the jar. It's that good. It's a classic thing to eat on Pesach, on matzah. It's a great one to find. Any Israeli or kosher supermarket nowadays will sell this around the world because it also has a very long life shelf. Not exactly the healthiest thing, but certainly delicious. This one, I can't imagine many of you are going to ever have to consume, but that just like with curse words, just like with slang, just like with other words, that doesn't mean you shouldn't know about it. Cristal. Cristal is like the lowest brand of carbonated drinks in Israel. We have all the big names from around the world, all the ones, of course, you know from the United States. And Cristal is a local one that comes in a variety of flavors, one more fluorescent in color and certainly in taste than the other. Super artificial, super cheap. Highly recommend not drinking one of these, but at least they come in interesting colors which and flavors, which leads me to Feldman. In Israel, when it gets hot, and that's quite a lot of the year, it is very popular to walk around with ice cream or a popsicle in your hand. And we have a whole lesson on that. And of course, as it gets warmer outside, we will review all the different words and all the different types there are out there. Feldman is the cheapest kind. I personally like it because they make what I think is the best flavor of all, which is menta, a mint flavored popsicle, which let's face it, when it's hot out, mint flavored anything is what you want. So this is the best one I think there is, and it's super cheap. It is not the best of ingredients. It's not the most natural of ingredients, but it's very much an Israeli thing. And that gets to our last one, which also has a cultural phenomenon, wafel limon. Many of you probably know wafer cookies from abroad, right? A thin wafer that's got some sort of spread in the middle, like Nutella, like a chocolate flavor, like other flavors inside. They're very popular around the world. In Israel, we love wafelim. Any office meeting, you'll see wafelim all the time on the table with all sorts of other things, because again, long shelf life, everyone eats them. There's one flavor, however, you should avoid, and it's wafel limon. Wafel limon is exactly as it sounds like, it's lemon wafers. Even if you like this flavor, you're not supposed to like this flavor. So much so, this is a running joke in Israel that if you are at a dinner or you stop by someone's house or whatever it is, you're sitting at someone's home and they serve you wafel limon, if they serve you these lemon flavored wafer cookies, that's the signal for it's time for you to go home because no one likes these. And I'm putting out the worst thing I have in my house. I'm still being gracious as a host, but I'm putting out the worst thing in my house to make it clear like your time is up, our time together is up. I'll see you some other time, right? It's definitely a running joke, but you will see people do this. They'll have it at home just to bring out when the party is over or Shabbat dinner is over or whatever it is. Wafel limon. I want to switch gears really quick because we're running out of time and talk about Israel's true national food, which is not, and I hate to burst a lot of hearts here, it is falafel. It's not that falafel isn't eaten by Jews for centuries before the state of Israel. They have. Very much falafel is a street food, is still a popular food in Israel. It is eaten especially on Pesach, because there's, for those of you who eat kitniot, beans and legumes and pulses on Pesach, which more and more Israelis do, that's a great alternative, but it is not Israeli in origin. It is Middle Eastern in origin, just like so many other foods. No, the Israeli food is this, and you've probably seen it in the thing before. You've probably seen a different version of this. You've probably seen round versions of this as opposed to this version. This is ptitim. Ptitim in English, we often know as Israeli couscous, or when it's round, pearl couscous. Why is this Israeli? Very simple. In 1948, Israel declares its independence. And in the following years, in addition to fighting the War of Independence against the seven Arab armies that invaded the new state, Israel was absorbing almost 1 million Jews from around the Muslim world who were kicked out in various degrees of severity from millennia-old homes and quickly had to be settled in a country that didn't have a whole lot going on for it. It was fighting a war for its existence. It had no natural resources that were being developed. It had little food that it could spare, and not a lot of land that was already built up, excuse me, for settling new immigrants. So a lot of these immigrants lived in ma'abarot, transit camps. Some of them were literally camps, tents. Some of them were a little bit more sturdy, um, aluminum shell sides, whatever it may be. Not a lot of money and not a lot of resources for them. David Ben-Gurion, the Prime Minister of Israel, turned to Osem. Osem, which means barn in Hebrew, was one of the first food companies that was created in Free State Israel, in the uh, Zionist movement. And he turned to the CEO of Osem and he's like, I need to feed all these people. Help me, help me, help me. What do I do? And so Osem created what we call petitim. Petitim in Hebrew means flakes. And the idea was, what can we make that looks like what these people coming from Muslim countries ate, that is shelf stable, that is cheap to make, that is filling, and can feed a lot of people at once? And so what they did was they made basically a paste. As opposed to pasta, which is, flour and eggs, sometimes other things in it. And as opposed to couscous, actual couscous, which is little semolina grains, either independent or mushed together, like maftul or muhrabia, titim is a paste of water and flour that's then toasted and formed into shapes. Right? So it's different than orzo and pasta, and it's different than couscous. It's in the middle. So by being toasted, it also is shelf stable. And the original form you see on the left was rice shaped, orez. Orez means rice. So this isn't rice. This is ptitim afuyim, baked titim, baked Israeli couscous in the shape of orez. The nickname for this dish for many years was Orez Ben Gurion, Ben Gurion's rice, because he gets credit for having created what became all of a sudden this culinary masterpiece around the world, which is born out of necessity and born out of abject poverty, for lack of a better term. Right? This is Israel's national dish, not just because of the story, but because everyone makes this. This is one of the easiest things to make. It's found in almost every pantry in Israel. There are various kinds. There's a whole wheat kind. There's various shapes you can make. Everyone has a different recipe of how they make it. You can even make this into a sweet recipe, depending on what you're doing it in. On the right-hand side, you will see the instructions. On every packet, there's an instruction in addition to its nutritional label. And while we've gone on over it in the past, I thought this would be a great time to once again go over the recipe, which everyone has a different recipe of how you can make this and what you add to it. Some people will swear to always adding some tomato paste and onion. Some people will go fancier. What I've done here is write it out in bigger letters, right? And what we're going to do in Wednesday's class, for those of you who join us for Cafe Olé Conversations, when we talk about sharing recipes or a restaurant or any foods we would recommend, because we're going to use the vocabulary that we learned today, we're also going to go over this recipe. And in today's vocabulary list, you're going to see the main vocabulary from a recipe, which is the actual actions. In Hebrew, excuse me, when you follow a recipe in Hebrew, the verbs are going to come in one of two forms. Either like they do here in the infinitive. Letagen means to fry. Lehosif means to add. Lechasot means to cover. Okay? It's either going to be in the infinitive or it's going to be in the present tense plural. Right? Mitagnim et aptitim tigun katsar b'shemen. It's basically telling you, not knowing who the audience is yet, but assuming it's a wide variety of people of all genders and backgrounds, fry instead of to fry. Those are two different ways we do instructions in Hebrew, whether it's a recipe or anything else, either the infinitive or Gender inclusive, plural, present tense. Okay. So what you will see here is the original Osem recipe on the back of the box. Think of it like Nestle Toll House cookies. This is the original recipe from which people do all sorts of things with. Right? If you look at our vocabulary list really quick, you'll see at the bottom of the list, we have all of those commands that are included in that specific recipe, right? So obviously there are many more commands, many more actions when you are following a recipe. These are just for a petit team, because again, few things signify Israel like petit team. Not just because you can make it at home, it is super home cooking. It is nothing fancy. Certainly, the fanciness you hear of as Israeli couscous is kind of laughable because of its really very humble origins. But these are the actions to make petit team, right? To fry, to add, to boil, to cover, to stir, to wait. Very simple, direct actions that you can follow on that recipe list. I'm going to send you, in addition to the commercials we saw, and this vocabulary list and the full recipe in Hebrew. We'll obviously also translate that recipe for you, and that will be part of the prompts for those who join us for Wednesday's class. I'm going to stop here and answer some questions because I see we have a bunch in the Q&A. If I don't get to all of you, you can always write to us at Hebrew at nbn.org.il, our email address. Again, remember, next week we're taking a break, and then we're back in 2 weeks after this week's Wednesday's Cafe Ole conversations with our spring sessions. You can always double check if you are registered. You should have, if you would have already gotten an invitation to join us for the spring sessions. If not, you can always sign up yourselves. Go to our website, nbn.org.il, find Cafe Ole. You'll find the prompt to sign up there. Very easy. With that, I see we have a bunch in the Q&A. I'm going to answer as many as I can in the time we have remaining. See someone requested a class topic. Please send it to us by email. The chat gets saved. The Q&A does not. So please put it there. If you did not get the vocab list from last week, go to our YouTube channel. Always, folks, if you miss anything, go to youtube.com, Cafe Ole, type in the get the last lesson in the description. You'll see a link to the vocabulary list. Why chamutz prior to matok? We could easily say that that's alphabetical. Chet comes before mem, therefore it's chamutz matok, as opposed to English where it's sweet and sour. There is also an aesthetic thing behind it, but we'll leave it to alphabetical. Is amba like chutney? It's not. Think of it more like, if you're familiar with Indian cuisine, think of it like mango pickle. That's probably the closest thing, if not the exact same thing as it is in terms of that almost oily sauce, liquid that suspends big chunks of mango. So it's not mango chutney, it's mango pickle is the best way to think about it. Great question. Limon is not lemon, but lime. A great question for my fellow lime lovers. In Israel, you can absolutely get limes. They are called limon lime. Because what better way to confuse you? And there are people who will indeed sell green lemons and try to pass them off as lime. If you know the difference between lemon and lime, you can suss it out very quickly, not just by look, but also just scratching the skin with your fingernail. But a limon is a lemon. A limon lime is a lime. Could you write the expression for rosewater? Me vladim. That one's just easier because it's a literal translation. Me zohar is not. You wouldn't know what me zohar is unless someone explained it to you. But if you see a clear bottle of liquid and it's got a rose on it and it says me vladim, literally rose water, that's what it is. Okay. Would you use baharat in mulled wine? Wow, is that a great idea? I'm writing that one down. As both a fan of Baharat and mulled wine, challenge accepted. I will tell you how that goes. Wow, I actually love that idea. Baharat in mulled wine. It's not exactly the same palette because Baharat will include things like cumin and coriander, but it does have a lot of the similar things. It has a little bit of anise. It'll have cinnamon. It'll have nutmeg. It'll have allspice. So very mulling spices, but it'll also have more savory ones like cumin and cardamom. That being said, I'm going to work on that. Which shapes indicate the respective filling Bolecasim? There is a guide to it. If I can find it, I'll pass it on to you all. But there is a very specific guide. The one I know off the top of my head is if it's a small rectangle or if it's rectangular shaped in general, that's potato. If it's triangle, it's cheese, and it's a specific type of cheese versus a half moon, which is another kind of cheese. What is flena bread? Great question. Flena is a bread that comes from Morocco. It looks similar to a ciabatta, or as we say here in Israel, chapeta, or all sorts of other ways to say it. So it's ovular, it's cylindrical, but it's rounded on the edges, and it's very fluffy. It's very fluffy bread. It's used a lot in sandwiches because we don't have a sound. We've talked about vowels in modern Hebrew. That sound doesn't exist, but kigel is how you'll often hear it. How do you spell hummus in Hebrew? Chet, vav, mem, vav, samech. No, but you do eat mufleta like a crepe. Someone's trying to correct me. It may not be cooked like a crepe, but you absolutely eat it like a crepe. It is thin. It is rolled with things in it. Is mufleta related to the muffaletta, the or New Orleans sandwich? Great question. Name-wise, probably. That's a good Wikipedia deep dive for us to have. Um, Okay, we are exactly out of time right now. So first off, Toda Rabah, thank you all for joining. Like I said, you are all welcome to join us for Wednesday's class. Sign up is on our website. If you have not already gotten the prompt to join us for the spring session, just go to the website and register yourself, nbn.org.il. Until then, this class will go up on YouTube and will be available in the next day or two. Whether you join us Wednesday or in 2 weeks from now for our spring session, Toda Rabah, thank you all again. Besorot tovot, as we say in Hebrew, may we only have good news. And lehitrot, see you all very soon. Take care.